obviously, we all agree it's not going to stop. And furthermore, can you imagine, let's say that the US unilaterally said, OK, we're not going to develop AI.
Well,
China would then go, excellent.
I wouldn't believe
No, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't. It would be bullshit.
Exactly.
But let's say, hypothetically, they did. Then China would be like, excellent.
Yeah.
Now we're going
to race ahead in AI.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And vice versa if China said it.
Of course
so those geopolitical forces alone dictate that it will never stop. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast on this sort of rainy, windy, fairly gloomy day in very late March, 31st of March. Before I go off on a tangent, I should say that we've got a very special guest. I'm delighted to welcome back Ed Barton, who I'll let you introduce yourself properly, but you've been on the pod several times before, but we reckon not for about 3 years.
Yeah, once before, actually, I think it was. Not several times.
Only once?
Yeah, only the once.
I'm sure you've been on one at an event. And
definitely. I popped by the booth
I think
at
you did one at MWC.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, we did an MWC one. I remember you were all knackered because you'd had to schlep the entire length of all the halls to make it to that one.
Yeah, and
Dan Jones was on as well. I seem to remember that one. But
we were all lined up on little stalls, weren't we?
That's right.
One of the ones I missed.
But maybe it feels like more because, of course, until about 2 or 3 years ago, we were colleagues, and you and I were colleagues way back before either of us ever worked for Informa when we were at Strategy Analytics. But you left Informa, and in a sec I'll invite you to sort of tell us what you've been up to.
Sure.
But welcome back, Ed. Cheers.
Cheers.
You've done well. You've brought the Beaver Town.
Thank you. Cheers.
So Ed's got a selection of Beaver Town. He's got some neck oil, he's got some gamma ray, and he's even got a Lupoloid. A Lupoloid is 6.7%, so we'll see if we can get him on that.
That might get saved.
And see how much of a liability he is once he's finished that one.
Don't need to drink to do that.
Well, we've had, 10% beer on the...
Well, yeah, we've had people bring on...
We didn't get very far in it with it, though, did we?
Well, in fact, it's quite relevant to one segment we're going to talk about, because wasn't it Jeff from Rakuten Symphony that brought that?
Yep.
Yeah.
That
he was
killer
supposed
brew.
to be at the event they had.
He wasn't there, was he?
There.
He bailed. Maybe he couldn't find it. So that's one thing we did this week. We're going to do a segment on it later on. But Ian and I both managed to leave the house to go to the launch event of a company called Rakuten Symphony, who basically help operators do Open RAN deployments. And it's down near Weybridge, which isn't too far from Ian, but it's bloody far from Hitchin, I can tell you that much. And we thought, Ian and I looked at the map and we thought, that's only a 20-minute walk. We just walk over there. But it's on one of these like white-collar industrial estates, business park type of things. And they're always car-friendly but not very pedestrian-friendly. And the one pedestrian entrance was just closed. So we ended up having to walk through this museum of speed and vehicles and aviation called Brooklands.
Right.
And eventually made it there. So that was a little bit of a faff. But we were expecting to see a previous podcast guest, Jeff, there, who works for that company, but he wasn't for whatever reason. And I'm speculating that maybe he tried to walk it and then just gave up.
Yeah.
That could have been what happened. That's about the only thing. Actually, you didn't go to any of to that event afterward? There was like a Sonic event that we were talking
one
to
lab
Keith
opening
about.
A month is enough for me. Actually, a year, really, I think.
It was quite a big schlep, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't for me. It was for you. The biggest schlep was, as you say, walking through various sort of aviation and car. It's quite famous for. I didn't realise how famous Weybridge was for car racing and aviation. Apparently, most of the Concorde parts were made in Weybridge.
It's where all of the rich F1 people kind of probably live.
And they made
around,
various famous World War
working.
I planes were made in Weybridge.
Yeah,
the Sopwith Camel and things like that.
Wow.
And,
cool.
When we still made planes.
Not the Spitfire.
Maybe it's really famous for aviation, Weybridge.
But like Farnborough.
Farnborough, that's there's an air show there.
Big air show, yeah.
But it's not the same place.
No, I love the way you pronounce it like
Farnborough
American.
is not the same place as Weybridge, no.
Farnborough. Hello, mate.
Oh God,
We should get him
he's
doing
getting his
voices
Dick Van
more
Dyke
often.
out.
When are you going to start doing your Ethan Hawke?
I don't know. I don't think it's good for live publication.
Maybe not.
I mean, I don't think that much else has been going on this week. We can just sort of crack straight on with it.
Crack into another beer.
Crack into another beer. Well, I've made a dent in this one. when I was reviewing last week's pod, it was kind of a record, like full half hour of talking shit before we got on with it. So maybe I'll compensate this week.
Wait. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
You do your bit first.
Well, no, other than to say that if you're watching this on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms.
Okay, the city of the month, because it's the last day of the month, is here. It's London.
Oh.
And then the podium is RZ. What can I say as an Australian? We're not here to fuck spiders. Okay. Melbourne.
What's that a quote from?
Australia. It's an Australian saying. We're not here to fuck spiders.
They say that. In what context?
As in like. I thought
they just talked about tossing shrimps on the barbie and stuff.
Yeah, no, but that's like. Yeah, it's more like, oh, shall we go? And you go, well, what else? We'll have to go.
Oh, I see. That's their way of saying we might as well get on with it or whatever.
I don't know that one.
It's more like obviously.
Oh, I see. Okay, okay, fair enough.
And then the third is Columbus. Polluted Columbus these days.
Columbus,
Ohio.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is that near where that train?
I think so.
Derailed.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think so.
No.
Right. All right. Okay.
So cheers to all of you guys.
Yes. And whatever weird things you do with spiders on the other side of the world.
Which city was it in Australia?
Melbourne.
Melbourne. So Ed, been a little while.
Yeah.
We haven't seen each other face to face for a while. So
No.
hopefully you'll be able to hang around for a beer or two after.
Yeah,
if you don't have that lupaloid and have to be carried home.
You've given me an excuse for guilt-free Friday afternoon.
There we
drinking,
go.
Scott. So,
excellent.
and I can technically expense these beers as well.
Oh, brilliant!
So.
That's good stuff. We should have got more then.
Coming with a magnum of champagne.
So why don't I just shine the spotlight straight on you rather than botch your recent biography and get you to just tell us what you've been up to. When did you leave Omdia?
I left on. Oh God, I lose track of the years through the pandemics, but I think it was towards the end of 2021.
Okay, so about a year and a half or so.
Yeah,
okay.
Towards the end of 2021, I left Omdia, and I was very fortunate because at the time my a combination of friends and former colleagues, Rob Ambrose and Tom Morod, were founding an analyst firm called Coretta Research. It's where
so the place you joined is brand new.
Yeah. We were forged.
Well, that is handy, isn't it?
Forged in the depths of the pandemic.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, like Tom and Rob put together the the initial blueprint. And obviously they were quickly looking for additional hands to open and run the shop.
You were available.
Well, exactly, and there's a lot of serendipity, I think. But look, obviously the opportunity to work with good people in an exciting sector is important. The opportunity to work with your mates.
Yeah.
It's important. Myself and Tom have known each other for the best part of 20 years. We go all the way back to Screen Digest.
So he knows what you're like. That helps.
He does, yeah. Which
your quirks.
Makes it somewhat amazing that he let me through the door in some ways. But Rob Ambrose, the managing director and co-founder, we worked together at Screen Digest back in the day.
So that's pre-strategy analytics, isn't
exactly.
it?
So Screen Digest. Now when we look at where that core media team have ended up. And sort of, what's kind of happened. It did seem to be a bit of a breeding ground for kind of, entertainment industry analysts.
Right.
I mean, from that, Ampere Analysis was created from a team that was previously there. The half of Omdia, IHS Technology, kind of came from the core.
It used to be IHS Screen Digest.
Exactly.
One presumably bought the other.
Exactly. IHS bought Screen Digest, and now Coretta's just the latest manifestation of kind of some of the core members of that team.
And so what hat were you wearing when you were at Omdia? And has that changed at all in terms of your focus?
I was very much looking at entertainment distribution, predominantly TV and online streaming, and my focus, and that was very much on the consumer side. So the last time I was on the pod, we were talking a lot about Netflix, about bundling SVODs with broadband contracts,
which is subscription video on demand for those who don't know the abbreviation.
Exactly. We do love our acronyms, so I was much more on the consumer-facing side then, thinking about subscriber numbers, thinking about how companies like BT Sport or Netflix can generate the best ROI on their existing lines of business around strategy, around monetizing audiences.
And one of these companies can.
Huh?
Only one of these companies can.
True. Well, they can all monetize. It's just how good they are at it. I guess would be the thing. But at Coretta, we're very focused on media technology.
Right.
So gone from the consumer to the technology side in terms of research focus. And so what we mean by technology is all of the stuff you need to buy to capture, produce, store, distribute, monetize video.
That he keeps breaking.
This is exactly what I was saying. So, look, when we think about media technology, obviously everyone immediately thinks of a Hollywood studio, or they think of the BBC, they think of big studios and production houses, broadcast production centers with dozens of screens and massive banks of equipment and 4 very professional, highly paid editors pressing buttons like DJs or something like that.
Are you saying I'm worth all of this?
So, but like what we're really interested in at Coretta is, it's not just, those are the giants of the media technology world, but of course, the kind of organization which needs media technology scales all the way down to I think one of the sort of smallest outfits we've looked at recently in a professional sense is Five Guys FC. This is a 5-a-side football team in southwest London. They've got a fantastic.
Sponsored by the burger joint.
No, they're not. They've got
They might get sued now.
Yeah.
They should check out their YouTube channel. It is fantastic.
They should be.
And it is basically a 5-a-side football team where they film their coverage with mobile phones.
Yeah.
They use a very simple piece of editing software and they upload their games to YouTube with a little bit of
now, aren't there? It's like a massive business to be getting
every
into.
single YouTuber has a media technology infrastructure requirement. But looking around the studio, you guys are kind of getting up the food chain. I mean, Pierre was just saying you use Final Cut Pro. We can see the sort of switches and banks of equipment and video capture equipment and microphones. These are all things that we size, forecast. We talk a lot about the technology strategy and in how
it's interesting, actually.
Did you go to IBC in September last year? Then?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I was there too. I didn't see you.
Shit.
Still a lot of people.
Yeah, fair enough. Well,
one of my son's friends does a tennis sort of video blog thing for YouTube, and he's got a few 100,000 followers now. Yeah, makes more money than his dad, who's like head of comms for SAP. Makes a 6-figure salary out of it.
God damn,
that's impressive.
What, just from YouTube ad revenue?
Yep. And funds his, because he's on the ITF circuit as well. He sort of uses that to fund his. Give him a shout out.
Yeah, go for it.
Felix Miska at the Tennis Brothers is the channel.
I'll check it out. That sounds great.
But he's done really well. I mean, he's a really good presenter. He's very professional in front of the camera, actually, for a 19, 20-year-old. Right. And he's a good player. But he's got really good at like just editing, cutting the videos. I mean, he occasionally has someone from the ATP on, like you hit with Jack Draper, who's like one of Britain's top players at the moment. Yeah. Up there in the top 50 in the world, I think. So
152,000 subscribers.
It's 152. Okay, so I thought he was a bit more than that. But,
that's good.
But yeah, he's.
And you can make 6-figure. He makes salary off.
Pretty much makes 6
off 150k subscribers.
It's probably not only from ad money, but also
sponsorships and endorsements and merchandising as well. So it's enough to sort of.
Sponsorships will be the lion's share of that. Right. The YouTube ad will be a small bit of that.
Yeah, because I always figured they were a bit tight-assed at YouTube.
Not with the top guys. They're very generous.
Yeah. Well, but the scale, I mean, a bit like Spotify for musicians. Someone huge will still make money for Spotify, but the amount per play is
but
minuscule.
It's disproportionate. The top guys make way more.
I mean,
yes.
I mean, 100 grand for him a year, even then wouldn't be very much, obviously, compared with what they're paying the guys, like you're saying, the Mr. Beast or whatever you call it.
Yeah, that's true. But I think on YouTube, on OnlyFans, on Spotify.
Yeah, you're an expert on OnlyFans.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time researching. But there's a tiny strata of performers right at the top who make the lion's share of the money, and a huge long tail of people who kind of are there or thereabouts.
And that's true across. I've heard it. I don't know if this is precisely what you're talking about, but have you heard of a thing called the Pareto principle? Yeah, it's something like 20% of whatever accounts for 80% of the activity. In other words, you just get this top heavy. Yeah. And it applies across all sorts of economic things, like tax receipts or like earners.
Yes, yeah, true.
Anecdotally, it does feel like it's becoming more accentuated. Like, like it feels like money's being even more concentrated in the hands of people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and that sort of thing. But I don't know if that's borne out by the stats.
It's very communist of you.
Yeah, exactly. Boo, hiss. But yes, so that's all interesting. And obviously, you make that really good point about how, one of the great things about YouTube, even if I will criticise them for being a bit tight-assed with sharing the advertising revenue, is it has just... I've been an avid YouTube watcher for years. I tend to watch more social, political, cultural commentators.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one interesting thing, and there's a new alternative that's gaining momentum right now to YouTube, especially among people who maybe have positions and opinions that are outside of the Overton window of acceptable conversation, and that's called Rumble.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And that has...
That's Peter Thiel, I think, isn't it?
He might be involved.
I think
it looks like the sort of thing he would get involved in. Yeah, I mean, you get this weird sort of behind-the-scenes puppeteering going on between, let's say, to simplify it, right-aligned zillionaires like Peter Thiel, and then left-aligned zillionaires like, I don't know, Pierre Omidyar or Jeff Bezos or...
who? Pierre who?
He was eBay Omidyar.
Oh, the French-Iranian guy.
That's right. Yeah,
exactly. He was
one of the eBay founders, along with Elon Musk and a few others.
Maybe 2 million.
Yeah. And anyway, but they all like to chuck their money into sort of shifting the public conversation in the direction they want it to. So there's a lot of dicking about going on. Anyway, so Rumble could well be one of those ones where it's the more righty puppeteers involved. But they have people like... I'm a really big fan of Glenn Greenwald, who broke the sort of Snowden story.
Yes.
And he's very strident, but I think thorough and an objective journalist.
Is he outside the Overton window these days then?
Yeah, very much.
Wow, I just don't keep track of
What's the Overton window?
So have you not heard that term?
No.
Overton window basically describes the acceptable parameters of sort of conversation. So you can go in certain areas. I'm an example of someone who'll stray outside it every now and then. Maybe
who decides what the parameters are?
Well, it's arbitrary, but it's cultural. You just know that it's there. I mean, the Overton window there's not like a website where it tracks everything you can and can't say. The Overton windows are like an anecdotal, arbitrary thing where you just know that certain things, if you talk about them, you're likely to wind quite a lot of people up.
Right.
So it could be something like minimising climate change, or defending Donald Trump, or opining on identity politics and all that sort of thing. And you just get a sense of the Overton window, which is largely, I don't know, whatever the BBC might write about or whatever.
What's polite at a dinner party?
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't want to get into a row at a dinner party.
Who came up with that word then?
It's been around for a while,
presumably. But
yeah. Some bloke
went, this is what
some censorious bastard. Do you know? I don't know what the origins of it, but in the areas of like YouTube and Rumble that I tend to inhabit, a lot of it is outside the Overton window, and I mean, I'm not quite getting into like Alex Jones sort of really, really out there stuff, but somewhere between what is considered absolutely mainstream and that tends to be where I reside. And anyway, I find that the good thing about it, the point of this tangent, I'm making up for the lack of tangents in the intro, aren't I? Is platforms like YouTube. But YouTube has become censorious, and I've written about it plenty of times in the past. There's shit you can get banned for, which is not illegal or even harmful. It's just outside the Overton window. Yeah. And then Rumble exists, and one of the reasons I mentioned Rumble is another person who's on Rumble who was very much a darling of sort of dinner party sensibilities, and now isn't. Is the comedian Russell Brand?
Really?
Oh yeah,
he's ever a darling of media?
Yeah, there was a little while when a few years ago
on YouTube.
What did Russell Brand do? Was there
he's always been a bit controversial in the way that Jonathan Ross is.
Yeah.
But I just don't keep up with the cultural war.
There was a little while, I know, and I won't go on. It's a particular interest of mine, and I won't bore you all with it too much. But there was a little while where he was quite popular, certainly among party political leftists in the UK, because he did an interview with Jeremy Paxman where he's coming out with some quite earnest, why can't the world be a fairer, nicer place type of stuff. And then he got quite close to Ed Miliband for a little bit, but now he's sort of moved away from the party political stuff and more into the counterculture stuff.
But can you still be mainstream? And it's not because I mean, could someone be mainstreaming out? So, like Jeremy Clarkson, to me, is an example of someone who's quite controversial and has quite sort of. He comes across as an anti-environmentalist. I mean, I think he does it to wind people up. Actually, it's one of those guys.
Yeah.
But is he sort of outside the Overton window?
Possibly, although he's much more part of the establishment. Although I think he kind of trashed himself. He got too deep into feuding with was it Meghan Markle? He wrote a column that was quite.
He's always been involved in something. He's either hit someone at a BBC show or it's part of his brand. Whereas he'll still be doing Amazon shows in 5 years, no doubt. Even though he's
but I think he did get minorly cancelled for a column he wrote about Meghan Markle. That's for sure.
Yeah, but he's also been cancelled in the past for various other things he's said.
So you could say he's an older version of that, and Brand's a new one. But the thing about Brand, he's much more of an activist. He does a daily show on Rumble where he goes on about, whether vaccine policy was bollocks or whether eco stuff was bollocks. And as Pierre says, a lot of people will view his stuff as conspiracy theorist, which is another illustration of how the Overton window works. If you fall outside of it, you would tend to get labelled as things like tinfoil hat wearer, conspiracy theorist. But one person's conspiracy theorist is another person's investigative
By the way, the
journalist.
Meghan Markle stuff was bullshit. All he basically said was he didn't like her very much and drew some analogy with Queen
Game
Cersei,
of Thrones.
and that was it. So
cancellation events
you can't
are
say
very
you don't
arbitrary.
like her, apparently.
I think Jeremy Clarkson has probably ascended to a status where he's basically uncancelable.
Well, his grandfather didn't.
Yeah.
He's so loaded already. He's got one of the biggest shows on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's like South Park.
Pretty much. Yeah.
So just to justify that tangent, fun though it was, I was watching Russell Brand on Rumble, and actually he actually runs credits at the end of his sort of hour or so of Russell Brandy stuff, which I recommend even if you don't necessarily agree with a lot of what he says. He is a pretty funny, entertaining guy, and I say it with reluctance because there was a lot of time where he was really got on my tits.
Yeah,
but the current incarnation of Russell Brand's pretty fucking entertaining, and you get it for free on Rumble.
Yeah.
Anyway, and he was running credits at the end of his show. And there's about 20 people involved in producing his videos.
Wow.
But then at the same time, Joe Rogan, for example, I bet you he's got young Jamie, who's his Pierre.
He books his own people.
He books his own people. You tell me, there's hardly any post-production to a Rogan podcast, as far as I can tell.
But the main thing, I think, for Russell Brand is probably have people researching stuff and get like, look, this is what...
He also does a lot more jump cuts, so his stuff's tighter.
But I would still need just one editor. I'm just saying, like the staff is probably like research stuff.
Well, a lot of them, if you look at it, or I'll send you a screenshot. A lot of them are editors. So I don't know what they all do.
I got a tougher one for you on the Overton window. Is J.K. Rowling outside the Overton window?
Very much now, yeah.
So, see, that's the thing I find confusing about the Overton window, though, because I think at most dinner parties, if you said the sort of things that she thinks, most people go, yeah.
Sorry, I missed that.
It's only a very, very small. It's only a very, very small group of people who get wound up about that sort of thing.
Well, she is in a very niche area, which is an incredibly incendiary and I think hysterical area of sort of cultural political discussion, which is to do with transgender.
Which is
people.
why I think if you said most people agree with what she says. Let's be honest.
There's probably two. There's an Overton window for social networks, and there's an Overton window for the people you actually speak to in real life. And I would speculate that they're quite different.
Well, and I think bringing back to how we got onto this tangent, I think that's what YouTubers and Rumblers, if that's such a thing, and other basically independent content producers, that's what they do. Everyone will have their certain set of things that they're into, certain things that are sacred to them, certain things that are the opposite, that are just absolutely beyond the pale.
Yeah.
And then there'll be certain commentators, and you'll always be able to find them on YouTube or whatever, that quite closely align with it. I mean, the danger with that is then you can get into echo chambers and only listen to people that you totally agree with. But back when we just had normal broadcast... if the Beeb or ITV or latterly Sky wasn't covering it, you weren't represented at all.
Yeah, true. And I think, that brings us on to, another thing, which is what we find very interesting, which is that, you go back to, say, the mid-90s or whatever, and you try to think about someone like Russell Brand doing a daily show to that level of professionalism at the cost he's doing it at, for the ROI he's probably getting. But, these days it is possible to build your media technology infrastructure to get the distribution that was unthinkable perhaps even a decade ago. So it's a smaller audience, but your cost base is lower. And, your ability to serve increasingly niche audiences, has expanded across the board.
It's not a small audience it's a much bigger audience for the big guys, though.
Yeah.
For Rogan, etc.
That's true, but then the overall level of video consumption is going up, etc., etc., etc. So, you saw during the pandemic, a load of churches in the US invested hugely in media technology infrastructure so they could keep streaming the good word while no one could come to church.
So to sort of drag it back from the tangent to your sort of core area, a big part of what you do is like market sizing. Is that right?
Yeah, we size and forecast spending on media technology across 110 subsegments. So how much do people spend on cameras? How much do people spend on media asset management systems? How much do people spend on content protection technology, on online video platforms, etc., etc., etc.
And if you were to, and you may not do this, and this may be a shit question, but if you were to sort of if you were to put them all in a big basket of just media tech, I would assume that to some extent, because of what we were just describing with the long tail and people buying smaller bits of kit, but a lot more people doing it, that the overall market's growing. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. We think it's about 70 billion per annum, but healthy growth. I mean, like many other technology industries, there are segments of media technology which are becoming relatively commoditized, they've been worked out, so the cost comes down. There's not a huge amount of growth in that. But in something like online video platforms, or some of the stuff around fan engagement, which when we're talking particularly about sports organizations who want to deal directly with their fan base, if we're looking at things like analytics, really understanding how your audiences watch your content, many of these segments are absolutely exploding.
See, that sports one, I might encourage you to sort of expand on that a little bit, because there's another thing. We've spoken about individual content producers, and we could even though we're doing this under the auspices of our employer, Informa, this little setup here is very much more typical of a sort of one-man or in our case, three-man band type of thing. But you've got other sort of more novel forms of content production coming from other sources, and you mentioned sport. Yeah. So like you and I, we're both Spurs fans.
Yeah.
And we're in a room with Pierre, who's an Arsenal fan.
What did we do in the past?
I feel bad for you guys.
We got to be. We had about a decade of being smug towards Gooners, didn't we? But this year,
I wasn't particularly smug.
We still didn't win anything.
No, we still didn't win anything. As all my other Gooner friends never missed the opportunity to remind me.
Yeah.
But this year, Arsenal's having a great season, so we just got to shut the fuck up, haven't we?
And you lost your manager and the director. It's like it's a shambles.
It is. It's a bit of a mess there. It is a bit. But yes. So we won't talk about Spurs too much then, Ed. But sports tech. So the likes of Spurs, and Arsenal and whoever, they're increasingly looking to have sort of in-house production and produce their own content.
I mean, I think we can look at this in a number of ways. So first off, we're pretty fortunate at Coretta. We're working with some of the rights owners of some of the most precious sports rights in the world on their technology strategy. And, in the last few months, this has been a pretty intense area of research for us. So as part of that research, I've had a huge number of conversations with, leagues, some of the biggest leagues in the world, some of the smallest leagues in the world, and like clubs all the way through the pyramid. Just, what are you doing? What's your media technology strategy? What's your attitude towards direct consumer? Really trying to understand that particular
And when you say direct to consumer, that's them, let's say, producing a bit of video and then either releasing it for free or behind some kind of premium paywall.
Exactly. So if we take the example of a Premiership football club, so obviously the live rights are sold on a collective basis through the EPL, and those are sold to Sky and many places around the world for billions and billions of dollars, and that business is going to persist for a long, long time. However, increasingly over the last few years, clubs have been thinking to themselves, okay, so, Sky is doing a really great job for us on match days, but there are the other 6 days of the week. How do we've got this enormous fan database. We've got tens
and they all want constant updates and stuff.
Exactly.
Whether some player's got a sore foot or whatever.
Exactly. So, in the case of Spurs and many Premier League clubs, they've basically launched subscription-based video services. For a monthly or an annual subscription, you get access to an exclusive collection of club-related content. And this can be everything from, behind-the-scenes interviews with players. It can be video of training sessions. I know that a lot of Premiership clubs do that. It can be kind of, even just jokey stuff around, look at what the players are doing on a coach playing FIFA against each other. And it's just loads and loads of video content to be fed into various machines.
Yeah.
So, the paywall is one of them. But then, think about the demand on social networks for club-related video.
Yeah.
This is where some intense fan bases are. So,
and they'll all have millions of subscribers.
And the demand on social networks for video is practically infinite. You know how social networks work. You need to keep feeding them video constantly, day after day after day after day. So, a lot of clubs, one of the big drivers in them really upgrading their media technology was the need to capture and distribute more video to social networks. You're not just going to do that with, one enthusiastic marketing manager running around with a mobile phone. You know what I mean? You want to capture the video, you want to store it somewhere, you want to encode it into the right formats, and you want to be able to distribute it automatically to YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo,
and presumably
whatever.
there's a fair bit of interest. This is a different thing, but I was talking to someone recently about a concept called something like low code, no code, or something like that. Does that ring any bell?
Yeah.
Where basically the point of it is, and this overlaps. Actually, it reminds me of something I hadn't thought we were going to talk about, but we might mention it because there's been some like AI related stuff this week, which is quite interesting. I don't know if you have any take on that. We'll see how it goes. Anyway,
we look at that.
But the thing, one of the things, the most we all hear about this ChatGPT, and the thing about it is really this. It's basically like adding a natural language processing to an incredibly powerful web search at both ends. So you get natural language in, i.e. your language, incredibly powerful web search, and then natural language back out again, which obviously stands to make all sorts of people, not least journalists, redundant, as it can write stuff. Not us, of course, because we're special.
It might make you more
efficient.
Shit
journalists. Yeah, it might make us just raise our game.
Exactly.
But the relevance of that and low code, no code is I would assume that there are lots of people who want to get into producing content but can't really be bothered to get into the technicalities of it, and they just want bits of technology that will just turn whatever they film with their phone or their camera into something that's internet friendly straight away.
You're completely right.
So that's part of it.
So this has been one of the massive trends of media technology over the last couple of decades. You could argue the democratization of things of capabilities that were previously only available to someone like a Sky or a BBC or a Netflix. There are huge number of vendors who basically specialize in making things like production software, editing software, clipping software, highlight software, graphics software, captioning, usable and operable by non-expert people. So you don't have to hire a production crew with an expert editor, a highlights editor.
I find all that no-code stuff very worrying, to be honest.
Yeah, why is that? Let's let Led finish.
Just to finish off that tangent, instead of having to buy these things and then put them on a huge box in your server room, quite a lot of them are now accessible through a web browser. And you need a minimal or even barely any amount of training if you can use a template to be able to start putting together.
Sort of import some raw media and then it will just sort it all out for you.
Feed it video and it will do stuff.
What's your no code?
So I like that side of it. I think that's great. I think the worry of it is it's more of this sort of stacking, sort of layer, standing on the shoulders of giants kind of thing. The actual complexity becomes nothing to do with automation. It's just the complexity of doing it. Nobody knows how it's done anymore. Once you start building, it becomes more and more of a black box. So if you make it so easy for somebody to come along and write computer programs that they don't even need to know any code at all, then
so you're worried about the lowering of the barriers to entry?
Well, this is a problem with technology anyway, is that, one like C++ programming, which is like really sort of the nitty-gritty. It's what you used to get taught. It's very hard to get them nowadays. They're all like old, or people don't get caught that.
People aren't learning it anymore?
C++ has been around as far as I'm aware.
For a long time.
A really long time.
But I didn't know whether or not coders are still
So the
needed.
coding languages today are things like Python, but they tend to abstract more and more of the complexity. Then you get to low code, you're abstracting even more of it away. You get to no code, you don't really need to know any programming skills at all. So ideally you can have what Ed said, where you have lots of people being able to take advantage of spinning up their own programs and doing things, but the number of people who actually understand how this stuff works, and then bearing in mind that with AI, more and more of it's going to be machine-based anyway, and we're just relying on computers to do it. Nobody really knows how. It's like that book that someone wrote a book is like If the World Ends, 6 days to try and get things up and running again.
Yeah.
And it's all about how to create soap from lye and how to get electricity going. And,
Yeah.
nobody
So you're
understands
talking about
the basics
people just
of
not
science.
knowing how things actually work because there's so many layers of abstraction between the actual mechanics.
But it's now reaching an extreme point when it gets to the stage where you don't even need to have any sort of basic number crunching coding skills to be able to put together a program.
I mean, what you're talking about, Ian, that level of expertise, raw coding and making stuff yourself, like wild and wonderful pieces of media technology for particularly around editing and live production. These capabilities still exist at the largest organisations, which might employ
they exist at 2 or 3
dozens,
organisations.
Increasingly, but dozens, if not hundreds, of developers, and that kind of speaks to the whole, which is another quite big thing in the area I work in, on the whole build versus buy debate. When Netflix is looking for, recently put in an entire streaming advertising infrastructure so that it can move into a new business model, ad-supported, subscription-based streaming. Netflix is one of the most technically capable organizations in the world. They built a huge amount of their own stack. They spend $100 million a year or so and dozens of developers' time on trying to solve the problem of content recommendation, which is still ongoing. They do.
I still don't find their user interface perfect in that respect.
But there's still a relatively low number of people compared with how many people are reliant on this technology.
True.
Yeah?
True.
I mean, I don't see huge numbers of young people that I know in the UK, not as many as I'd like to see actually, given the way things are going, saying I want to go into AI development, or I see people doing things like we're doing soft subjects too much, and then we get things like no code coming along, and you think, well, really? I mean, that's going to encourage even more of this. I'd actually like to see people learning more of the kind of nitty gritty, and I don't want to see it all being concentrated in 3 big American firms either.
That's true. I just to finish off the Netflix point, I thought it was interesting that they decided to turn to Microsoft to do that rather than build their own. Although, recently, apparently the rumour is that they're now looking at actually building their own because maybe they're not particularly delighted with how it's gone. And just to follow on from your point, Ian, about what are the generations of the future getting into? I mean, there is some of the sexiest graduate roles at the moment are around data science and applying cloud
we have
technology.
slightly different definitions of sexy.
Well, and data science is it's not sexy.
No, I know what you mean.
But it's highly compensated.
Yeah.
If you come out of university and you land a job at one of the big cloud-based data platforms or at one of the leading data science type consulting organizations of which you're earning a packet by the time you're 29. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Our former colleague of mine, Julian Tace, started up a data science consulting business which happens to use data science. Maybe he would correct me too, but they've been expanding like absolute crazy, and the relevance of what they do.
But I suspect the opportunities for that sort of job are relatively. It's a thing that only a certain number of people can do. There's a big mismatch. I mean, it's almost like, in the past, people didn't have sort of middle class, white collar roles available to them. More to do with social strata and opportunities in life.
Yeah.
I sense now we have the same situation, but it's more because these things require an ability that some people just don't have, and yet the people who don't have the ability to do it are going to be heavily reliant on this stuff in the future.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean?
Okay, so here's a question for you, Ian.
Yeah.
Go back 3 or 4 years when you were leaving university. If
He's had a tough couple of years.
Knowing what you do now, or maybe even before you were going to university, decide on your degree subject, what would your career path look like?
I don't know. I mean, I agree.
Armed with forethought.
I'd probably have tried to do something less humanities-based and maybe more maths-based. But I don't know if I'd be capable. I mean, coding at that level is not easy. From what I've heard, I've never got into it.
Yeah.
Well,
and yet we're increasingly dependent on a world that is generated by these people and runs on code. And it's incredibly high level, very, very advanced stuff. I mean, I'm not saying there's only 0.00001% of the world's population could do it. I know it's broader than that, but I just have this slight concern with a planet where a small number of super smart people generating this stuff, and then it gets taken to another level by computers, and we do the no code. You get on with the no code stuff, and then when it eventually breaks down or something doesn't work, we've got who knows how to sort of deal with the cleanup.
I think maybe your point is around a concentration of over-reliance on a particular thing, which is, you look around the semiconductor industry and how reliant it is on Taiwan and some of the geopolitical tensions around that. Suddenly everyone's, freaking absolutely terrified that we might not be able to build a smartphone.
That's why I've got an issue with Open RAN. It's for the same reason.
I mean, I think, and that's one of the things we're going to come on to in greater depth. I think, Ian, your point does slightly chime with my AI piece that I wrote this week, and Pierre, you'll be proud to hear that I used a screenshot from the first Terminator film in this AI story. And just to quickly explain this to our audience, if they weren't aware of it, there was a public letter written among the signatories were Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak, who's one of the founders of Apple, just going, can we just pause AI development?
I didn't really get that.
I didn't get that.
I didn't get that at all.
No, by all means,
very hard to fathom.
let me position it and explain why I brought it up, and then by all means, sort of push back on it. And their rationale was we've now got to ChatGPT, which probably most people have heard of, but it's this thing I was talking about earlier, where you've got NLP plus very powerful computing. That ran on a model called GPT-3. Yeah, you see, you don't want to open them slowly, Ed. That's what's going wrong.
You've been running it, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. I legged it from Houston.
That was Ed trying to open a gamma ray for those who are listening. And then they came up within about 6 months, they came up with GPT-4. Which is about a zillion times better than GPT-3. And so people are starting to shit themselves a little bit about the rate of progress of this stuff. And that's where the Terminator analogy, while hyperbolic and probably inaccurate, stands to reason, because, there's that bit where Schwarzenegger explains how the sort of rate of development of this thing went exponential.
Do you know what I reckon's coming next?
Do it.
GPT-5.
Shit.
That's my prediction. That's my prediction.
It became self-aware.
There's going to be GPT-5.
Oh, this is Terminator 2 when he's talking.
Well, yeah, but it's the whole premise of the whole Terminator thing, isn't it? Is this very, and this is where I think it's relevant to what Ian's saying. Basically, where human beings had delegated so much of the cleverness that goes on in the case of the Terminator to running weapon systems, that they were basically cut out of the loop.
Well, I'm very sympathetic to that letter. I just don't understand the guys that have writing it. But the letter, I had a discussion with this in the pub with Hannah in the pub last night about this, about how I just think I think the sentiment of the letter, and I haven't read it in depth, was that things are just moving so quickly now. And I think this has been an issue ever since ChatGPT came along, and the stuff that Ed was talking about. We don't really know the downstream effects of this. It's very, very. Technology is always a bit of a concern at how quickly it's happening, because it can be very disruptive. But we're now at a stage where it's happening at sort of hypersonic speed.
Right.
It's disrupting educational systems. Schools are worried about how they deal with this. Do they teach kids to write essays anymore? Is it relevant even?
It's a very interesting point. Yeah.
You just don't. It's got to the point where, one problem with technology anyway is regulators are always behind it.
Of course,
they never know how to deal with mergers. They don't know how to approach big companies. How the hell are they supposed to deal with this stuff? Frankly, it's we don't know what could come of this, and then the government's lost its way before.
I think so. Your point about, I love what Margaret Atwood, the Canadian author, said about technology. She said, with every new technology, there's a good side, a bad side, and a stupid side, which no one ever predicts. So I'm still waiting.
I like her money thing. We always talk about her sort of because she predicted the rise of sort of electronic money,
right?
Which is in the Handmaid's Tale, how they take money away from women. Basically, they cancel women's ability to use contactless money.
I read that. I didn't even.
Which happened in real life in Canada during the lockdown.
Yeah,
when you got some people protesting and they froze all their bank accounts.
As well.
She is Canadian.
So she probably have loved that.
She must have been watching that, going, God damn.
But look. But the thing is, with this letter about hey everyone, let's all get around a campfire and pause.
Take a breather.
I don't understand those guys writing it.
Even if everyone sort of outwardly agreed, do we really think that banks of talented developers inside Microsoft, Google, Tencent, wherever, are suddenly going to stop
Of course not.
The NSA or MI5 or whatever. Of course not. It's still going to be going on. So it just seems.
I don't understand why it was written.
I didn't take it. I didn't take it at face value. I took it as.
Can we just stop progress?
Well, no, I took it as them actually saying, so there's the stated thing, which they want everyone to pause development beyond the level of GPT-4 for 6 months, which is obviously not viable. The genie's out the bottle.
No,
as Ed says, the geeks are going to geek.
Exactly.
It's like saying don't go to the pub for 6 months, isn't it?
Do you know what I mean? Except that would have...
Who would ever do that?
Yeah.
It's just
so look, we're all pissed enough. But I think perhaps what they were trying to do, you think of Musk, and you may or may not like him and what he gets up to, but I think everyone acknowledges that he operates on very sort of exalted intellectual levels. And maybe he was just thinking, this will start the conversation, and it will start a million conversations like the one you had in the pub last night, the one we're having now.
Yeah, maybe.
And maybe it was only making such an outlandish call as that. If they just written an open letter going, I don't know, I'm feeling a bit dodgy about this, maybe it wouldn't have elicited so much comment. Anyway, maybe I'm giving him too much credit.
I think you might be right. Maybe that was what it was about.
But my view is we do need to talk about it. And, I've been making semi-joking references to the Terminator on this pod for years, haven't I? And, they're only semi-joking because I do think, and it seems Luddite, and to a certain degree it is Luddite.
I hate that word.
But not all progress is necessarily, not all technological progress is an unalloyed positive.
But people who I hate the use of the word Luddites, because the original Luddites weren't opposing technological progress. They just didn't want to lose their bloody jobs.
Right. But that comes up a lot with AI as well.
So I hate the fact that whenever you raise concerns about what the effects might be on employment, and we don't want a situation where we have riots going on in every major city of the world because of something like this. That's nothing to do with opposing technological progress. It's just saying, hang on a minute, maybe there's going to be some effect on society we need to be really concerned about because people are going to get killed or something.
And that's where I agree. I think can we just have a deep, profound and global public conversation about this? Because, the other thing that's concerning is I wrote at the end of my thing. So, obviously we all agree it's not going to stop. And furthermore, can you imagine, let's say that the US unilaterally said, okay, we're not going to develop AI. Well, China would then go, excellent.
I wouldn't believe
No, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't. It would be bullshit.
Exactly.
But let's say hypothetically they did. Then China would be like, excellent.
Yeah.
Now we're going
to race ahead in AI.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And vice versa if China said it.
Of course.
So those geopolitical forces alone dictate that it will never stop.
Of course.
But there is a danger of it just running full pelt.
Like pointing at each other. You stop first.
Yeah, exactly. That's a Spider-Man meme.
So do you think Biden's going to phone up Xi and go, this AI stuff, right?
Well, I tell you, he could do a bit of fucking AI himself.
Wait. And how would Xi Jinping respond?
Xi Jinping would probably be like,
Biden.
Of course,
Shut
we
your
will.
mouth.
Pinky promise.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So, yes, but, I don't even know where you start the conversation about ethics and guardrails and that sort of thing, because anything to do with ethics is always subjective. Some people will think there should be no progress. Some people it should be unfettered. There'll be a whole spectrum of positions in between.
The thing that annoys me most about it is
it's too late.
It's like this. If you go on LinkedIn, and we're probably all sort of tapped into the same networks and have the same sorts of contacts, my LinkedIn feed is full of stuff about ChatGPT, and it's all these sort of unfettered sort of enthusiasm for it, without anybody sort of these guys who are really into it and it's going to make things so much better, and they don't seem to realise any of the downsides. Yeah. And then you go to the mainstream press, and there's almost complete silence about it. I don't recall. I think I've probably seen one or two stories on the BBC about ChatGPT, and very little at all about the broader sort of AI challenge and what it could mean. Yeah. You watch BBC News, there's nothing about it. I mean, they're all talking about, I'm not saying they're not big issues as well, Ukraine obviously, and Taiwan and China. They're similarly big things, but you kind of feel this has been a bit undercovered, I feel.
Because it's so big. It's so big. Where do you start?
It hasn't hurt anybody yet, though. When it starts doing it, they'll react.
But it'll do that really quickly. It could do that really quickly in a few months.
And then they'll write about it.
It hadn't hurt anyone in Terminator until it started World War III.
Hurting someone, I'm not saying it's going to start a war necessarily, but it's going to have societal consequences. And I don't believe there's going to be a little guy running around with red eyes, sort of shooting people.
That guy.
Well, I mean, there are also, you can easily
maybe in a few years.
Today you can easily.
What about those Boston
produce
Dynamics robots?
You can easily produce an automated robot sentry or whatever. There's that
we had
kind
that at Mobile World Congress this year. They had loads of those little Boston Dynamics fucking Black Mirror dogs.
Yeah, all you need to do is
walking
combine
around
one of those with ChatGPT, and you're laughing.
Let's just not make robots. But then again, the AI could still like shut off the power and all that stuff. But at least let's not make robots. Let's not make stuff that can squeeze us.
When you think, like, if you take a step back, every time we talk about smart something or other, like smart buildings, smart cities, whatever, and then and the utopian view of these smart things is that they're all connected and they're all sort of plugged in and all that sort of thing. And then we introduce layers of AI controlling it all because it's all too complicated for us mere mortals to get our heads around.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can see it, but obviously I agree. You can't. The genie's out the bottle. You can't turn back the tide. All those other analogies. But Jesus Christ, how do we, as a planet, sort of align to make sure that this evolves in as benign a direction as possible?
I mean, I think, I sort of see AI on a continuum going from automation to machine learning to AI kind of thing. And at the moment, when they're talking about things like smart stadiums and smart buildings, we're talking about a lot of automation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When we're not kind of going into the, AI has learned that because the 7th floor keeps turning down the air conditioning on May the 3rd or whatever, then it should do it automatically. There might be some kind of behavioural routines built in.
But actual intelligence is still quite limited.
The AI word is thrown in way too much.
Exactly. Because currently it's kind of really. I think, and look, currently. Now, I'm sure, can't think of one off the top of my head. I'm sure there have been a load of airplane disasters or whatever. Automation has been responsible for a lot of bad stuff already. You know what I mean? But then I think we'd also argue that the benefits of automation have far outweighed the odd plane crash or Tesla going skew whiff on auto drive or whatever it is. That we're not going to pause the technological progress or research on those sorts of things. And I think it's a similar thing as we kind of progress through machine learning to full artificial intelligence, however it is you precisely define it.
Artificial general intelligence is the big one, isn't it?
Yeah.
So before we've got a couple of other news items we want to talk about this week, but I'm aware that we've spoken about your day job a little bit, Ed, but we've gone off on massive tangents, and that's fine. It's one of the reasons we're happy to have you on here. We know you can handle any tangents we throw at you. But, just steering it back, maybe just to finish off on your day job, given this is a Telecoms.com podcast, maybe we can have a quick chat about what you do as a day job and where the Venn diagram with the core telecoms industry. Like, for example, one thing that springs to mind is within 5G, we were at Mobile World Congress this year. A big theme of that was searching for monetization and for use cases and, where is the ROI on 5G investments? And increasingly they talk about it being communication services being offered to other verticals, as we insist on calling them in the business world, i.e. other industries.
Yeah.
And so, one thing that strikes me is 5G, one of the things it offers is obviously this greater capacity and bandwidth. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, in the sort of media tech side of things, whether using cellular networks, whether there's an overlap there, or if there's another one.
There certainly is. There 5G private networks have been used on an experimental basis, certainly as proofs of concept for outside broadcasts. So if you imagine you're filming a sporting event, or Britain's Got Talent, or the King Charles's coronation or whatever, and you've got this huge, got loads of cameras. You've got an outside broadcast van with, lots of people sitting in, and, the connectivity you need from all of the cameras and mics or whatever to the production van to then go up a fat pipe, probably through a satellite uplink or whatever. But just in the sort of the broadcast area,
immediate environment,
exactly. Instead of running around miles and miles of cables, companies have, done proofs of concept around using a 5G private network to eliminate the need for that.
How are those going? Is it
I think EE did it at Wembley. I think it's done
EE likes to show off use cases at Wembley.
Absolutely. Well, it's a sponsor there, I guess.
Do you know what? One of the times I went to the EE box was to see Spurs get knocked out of Europe one year. I can't remember what it was, Juventus or something like that. That was a sad evening. Yeah, so that's viable.
Yeah. So 5G private networks for outside broadcast connectivity, is absolutely a thing. When you say, it's not just in the last year that network operators have been looking for particularly consumer ROI on 5G. It's been years now. Like US networks are $100 billion upside down on 5G network investment without a clear path to profitability. And, they're hurting. Yeah. The consumer side, a lot of the early speculative use cases, particularly around things like, augmented reality, virtual reality, cloud gaming, are a thing, but nowhere near as big or as prevalent as
they're not the ROI they need.
Nowhere close. So I think this is where some of the emphasis. Well, a lot of people, a lot of my former colleagues, your present colleagues, were saying that the big stories for 5G are going to be around the enterprise. So 5G private networks for use cases like an outside broadcast, 5G private network for a manufacturing facility, for a port where you've got to keep track of tens of thousands of shipping containers moving around.
The sort of evolution from the RFID sort of model.
Exactly, moving into the whole Internet of Things kind of space. That seems to be where some of the most interesting real world deployments are happening. But these things, those things take kind of the upgrade cycle on a port's infrastructure is slightly longer than a consumer getting a new mobile phone. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and the level of complexity. But once these things, as these things are going to be more increasingly deployed, then perhaps there's a story there, but then we come back to the other problems, which is how much of a share does the network operator get?
Yes,
of that?
Totally. That's
or is it going to be some sexy IoT startup, which is
or some other SI or Accenture type of setup?
Exactly. And they're just saying, and the 5G network, private network, will increasingly become commoditized, and it'll just be like, just hump me a 4-pack of your Vodafone 5G private network over here, and I'm going to do the clever high margin stuff.
Cool. Okay. Well, that covers it pretty well. There's one last thing, actually.
Sure.
A slight sort of tangent, but what you were talking about made me think of it. And we maybe spoke about this when you've been on the pod before. Certain operators went through a period of thinking, I tell you what, let's buy content media setups, and then there'll be some kind of synergy or adjacency or whatever that'll come from it. I don't know if you agree, but I think my verdict on that is it's almost an entirely failed initiative. I'm thinking about AT&T ending up having to dispose of most of its Time Warner acquisition. I think about BT retreating from content. But, that's my telecoms-centric point of view. Do you agree? Or?
So first off, margins on consumer broadband are much higher than margins on TV. So, when telecom operators are looking across their portfolio, then the accountants are looking at the broadband and mobile business and going, I like the margins on that. They look at the TV business and they go, I don't like the margins on that. What's going on? What's going on there? So that's been.
And when you say margin on TV, that's across the board. That's producing the content and selling it.
It's acquiring high quality, unique content. You mentioned the case of BT.
So they spent a fair bit of money on Premier League, didn't they?
They spent an absolute fortune on Premier League. In one of my previous roles, we recall calculating. The cost of content per subscriber across, the world's telcos. And, BT was so far out in front on that because, the direct BT TV subscriber base was relatively small.
Yeah.
But that's not the whole story because BT spent that money for leadership of UK high-speed broadband, BT Infinity, which they undoubtedly succeeded at. But so this is where we come to the adjacent.
When you say leadership, you mean brand infrastructure,
market leadership, market leadership, market share. Yeah, because if you
I've got them. I've just moved to their fibre myself.
If you subscribe to BT Infinity, you got access to BT Sport for free. Yeah, do you remember that was in the days of Gavin?
Yeah. Patterson.
Exactly.
Hasselhoff.
You were a BT customer before, though.
I was a BT customer before, and then they've always had this weird thing since they acquired EE of them actually selling against each other, which I find quite amusing, knowing a bit more about the sort of inside. Yeah. And then EE sort of sold me their broadband, which at the time was better. And then, as I think I've said on the pod recently, I went to sort out my phone because I left it at a some Pancras station. I went to get a new SIM, and then they said, hold on a sec, you could get a much better deal than the E1 you're on, switching back to BT.
That's when you upgraded to the full speed.
That's when I went to full fibre.
But so the thing Ed was on about was like them losing sort of market share to people like Sky, who were doing, people who were sort of other retail brands that are using the same infrastructure, but they'll lure your customers because they've got Sky bundling its broadband offer with its high speed.
Well, that's it, isn't it?
With its football stuff.
So the bundling, the pot sweetening thing's interesting, but then you have to do these calculations.
Well, that was the worry for BT, though, is once it's got those unbundlers in the market and they can offer content as well, then you're going to lose your broadband customers, basically.
But, I mean, I would hesitate to call telco TV a failed strategy overall, because most of the world's telcos who operate a broadband network still offer a TV service of some description. They just don't want to spend as much of it as, say, a BT Sport or an AT&T did on exclusive original content. So maybe you're just offering a bouquet of free-to-air channels.
When with AT&T, I think there was some ad tech missteps. I think they thought there was some clever shit they could do with their audience and monetizing their audience.
That was the big strategy, that they'd be able to target and serve advertising across TV, online streaming, and mobile. And for one single campaign by targeted advertising across all. I was relatively close with them at the time. We were talking about it, and you could kind of see the rationale about it. I don't know if they were executing it very, very difficult.
But their other rationale was bullshit, and people were calling out at the time.
Right.
The idea of having an integrated connectivity and TV business, which is the words used by Ralph Stevenson, is it Ralph? The former
Randall Stevenson.
Would be some kind of big strategic goal, and to then go and spend $85 billion on that at a time when Netflix and Amazon are on the rise. I mean, that's a colossal fuck up.
That is,
I'm afraid they were absolutely clueless. And they all rewarded themselves generously. Continued to.
Randall's
afterwards.
Still doing all right.
I'm pretty sure he's not shopping at Aldi.
And then the guy who took over, John Stankey, who's now the CEO, who was in charge of the whole sort of Warner Media thing, I think, before it eventually got spun off, and they've basically written off half the value of it. And that's one of the biggest M&A disasters in. The thing I find sad is that if they can't make a success of things like of going into TV in a bigger way. I mean, that seems like a real adjacent industry, I think, for telco. Then what hope do they ever stand in going into things like banking or energy or some of these other markets where there's less of an obvious connection? You're not running something down your broadband pipe in the same way. And it's just, it doesn't say much for diversification if they can do it in TV.
One quick thought on the adjacency of it. I mean, it's adjacent maybe in Ed's day job, which is technology, but I think TV and content on the whole is about creativity. And I remember when I was writing about the AT&T thing and they were putting people like Stanky in charge of HBO.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at things like Game of Thrones and you look at the budget that was thrown at it and you look at the creative license the people who produced it must have had. That doesn't lend itself to sort of business bean counter types. It has to be people who are a bit more hands off and a bit like, look, I trust you, creative.
No, when I say adjacent, I mean you have to get this stuff over your broadband connection.
That's that way I agree.
It's like energy, and banking. They were just saying, because we've got a good network and we've got lots of customer service points that that people can come in and open up bank accounts at the same time, sort of thing. And we've got a lot of outreach. Whereas the way to do it is not to interfere in that creative process. You give them the freedom to carry on. Unfortunately, they didn't do that. They had idiots like John Stanky there fucking around with it, and they basically screwed it up.
Which is inevitable. Okay, before we move, did you have any last thoughts on that particular subject, Ed?
Look, I do agree in marrying content with broadband. You just got to make sure not to spend too much on it. And one of the great things that a lot of telcos around the world have done incredibly well, and have a pretty leading role in the market is in aggregating third-party streaming services, giving you a very cheap, quite often Android TV-based set-top box, and it just gives you a really easy way, one place in which to watch all of your favourite streaming services on your big TV through their broadband connection. So it doesn't cost them a huge amount of money. It's not a huge high-margin revenue generator, but it does create that little bit of stickiness, that little bit of
pleasant user
differentiation.
experience.
For people who are on a diet of streaming services and maybe just want to watch a few free-to-air channels for the odd bit of news and sport.
What do you think of the Sky Glass TV?
I mean, I think it's very interesting. Certainly when it launched, there did seem to be a reasonable groundswell of consumer concern around basically how well it was working, but those seem to have died down. I think it's a relatively compelling consumer offer in terms of if you want to get a nice big 55-inch, 65-inch flat panel type TV, it's a pretty cheap way of getting it. You know what I mean? And
so is it similar? Because I haven't thought about it that much. And I remember when it first came out, I thought, don't get into hardware.
Yeah.
But it's part of it, like how back when we used to be colleagues at Strategy Analytics, and I was on the smartphone team.
Yeah.
And and we would look at at how basically what operators were doing with smartphones is they were basically being financial service providers. They were basically saying, you can get hold of this, what at the time, the most you were paying for a smartphone was probably about 800 quid.
Well, that's what I got likened to, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's taking that model into the TV space.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, okay. Well, that's what I was, that's what I was checking.
I don't know how well it's done. I'd be interested to know.
We should actually say for our audience what it is.
I mean,
Americans won't know what it is.
What Sky Glass is.
Well, let Ed explain
it's
it.
a TV with Sky Pay TV, and I think Netflix is in part of the core subscription bundle. But you don't need any external boxes. You just get a flat panel TV delivered to your house, plug it into your broadband, plug it in, log in with your Sky username and password. Or
does it have to be Sky Broadband?
No, it doesn't.
But obviously you probably wouldn't go there unless you were all in on Sky.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure that there's a sexy consumer bundling deal for Sky Broadband and Sky Glass. Yeah. But I mean, it's just look, if that's your main screen TV, then how likely are you to churn off Sky?
But you don't buy it. Well, you don't buy it, right? You buy it per month.
Basically paying it on a subscription basis.
You pay it off on a subscription basis. So look, I mean,
that's why it's interesting.
We are in a time of relative consumer economic hardship. So if it comes time to upgrade your TV and you don't feel like splashing 1,500 quid on LG's latest super OLED, sexy 1mm thick flat panel, then you're just like, well, actually, if I just get Sky Glass, I still get a 65-inch panel, and I've just got my Sky payment going out each month.
And I've just got 60 quid a month, which I can afford, or whatever.
I'm pretty sure that's the business model. I don't know how successful it's been in the UK. However, I think they're also selling it in Italy through Sky Italia, and I think in Australia, Foxtel, the sort of the Sky of Australia, if you like, the main pay TV provider,
the Murdoch-y bit,
has also started selling it. Okay. So
it's like a big chunk of hardware, like a big thick. Presumably because it has like
it's big fuck off TV, mate.
Yeah, I mean, it's so it's not quite. It's I think it's like
BFO TV.
It's a couple of inches thick, I think. So but I mean, it's effectively got a sound bar and a set-top box of some kind built into it, kind of thing. So, so
it's interesting because I mean, I wouldn't. I've been SIM only on my phone for ages. I'm like the opposite end. I don't like the thought of bundles. I do total cost of ownership calculations and get all smug about how much less I'm paying versus a full package. But there are lots of other people. There are lots of other people who've got a life who don't spend their time making TCO calculations, and they just want something that works.
But lots of people want the latest, biggest iPhone without shelling out over $1,000.
But how bizarre, though! You're like, I'm going to cancel Sky, and I need to ship back the TV now.
What you do is
do you ever own it?
Well, no, presumably no. No, maybe after 3 years or something.
That's interesting.
I don't know the deal that well.
Because if you get a tablet on one of those deals, and then after a while you go, I don't want to get the 4G connection on it anymore, they just go, okay, we disconnect it. It's not like you have to return the tablet. It still works on Wi-Fi.
I'm pretty sure that's the same case. If it's sitting in someone's house, I mean, what are they going to do with a 3-year-old Sky Glass? I think in those cases, like. You'd kind of lose access to the premium stuff, but they would, you'd still be able to get access to kind of free-to-air stuff or whatever, because Sky would be hoping that at some point in the future...
They'll reactivate.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe it's just like with phones, like if you... with phones typically now, it used to be, back when I was at SA, it would be an 18-month thing. Now it's more like a 2-year thing.
I know.
And you get a 2-year thing, and you get your iPhone as long as you pay £60 a month for 2 years, and the TCO ends up being much higher than if you'd gone SIM only and just bought the iPhone direct from Apple.
Yeah.
But people are happy to do it. Maybe it's the same with the Sky Glass. I don't know. Anyway, we better move it on because we've got a couple of newsy things that we want to talk about. Ed, we'll just play it by ear. Some of it's going to be quite in the weeds telecom stuff, and you just butt in as and when.
No one's.
I'll go for the Lupoloid, shall I?
Go on.
Dun dun dun.
I think that
I should have known it's a weird colour one.
I've never had one of these before.
Yeah.
I'm not quite
So
sure.
It doesn't taste that strong.
6.7%.
But it doesn't feel like it.
Go on, Ed.
Really?
No.
I don't think I've ever had it.
Let no one be said you can't handle the
It's
pace.
mild. It's not like a dark...
Yes, it's mild till you start sounding like a tramp.
It's an IPA.
Yeah.
Nice.
No, I know what you mean. It doesn't taste like one of those medicinal stout type.
Yeah,
things,
like...
does it?
What are you saying, Ed? What's the verdict?
It's very pleasant.
It surprisingly doesn't taste like it's 6.7%.
It doesn't taste
like a glass of wine.
No, it doesn't taste like a glass.
Distressfully light.
Well, to be fair, it's like half the strength of some wine. Anyway, yes. So we alluded to Ian and I schlepping over to see Rakuten Symphony in Weybridge. So what I'm going to talk about now is not recap our ill-fated schlep. But
really?
I'm gonna invite Ian.
That's the most interesting bit, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but we've done it.
I thought that's before we started.
Yeah, well, we did it early. I mean, you can recap again, but I don't know what more there is to say other than we had a bit of a nightmare getting there, and it was a bit rainy.
I can picture you two like
I thought
cursing.
the recapping was before we actually started the pod, but maybe not.
No.
It's hard to know.
It seems that long ago
sometimes.
But what I'm going to do is, we both wrote it up. Obviously, you don't spend the whole day going on a schlep and not write it up.
Yeah.
But we took quite different angles, and I thought I'd start with your angle, Ian. So your piece that you published on Light Reading was Rakuten's Open RAN. I notice you do Open RAN with a lowercase o. Interesting.
It's not a problem.
I'm not doing any branding of Open RAN. Thank you very much.
Okay, fair enough.
I'll leave that to the.
I've only recently started putting a space between Open and RAN.
That's even worse. That's the way Vodafone writes.
I know.
Nobody
Well,
else.
there we go. So you're obviously more independent than I am.
Too much.
So your headline was Rakuten's Open RAN diversity claims ring hollow. So maybe you could recap on that, and I believe you've had a degree of sort of interaction with your story afterwards. So maybe you can tell us about that.
It's not anything new. It's more.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been making this point for about 2 years now. So. So
one of the points is that going to that event didn't change your mind.
Well, if you go to an event and the most used word at the event is diversity,
and they're not,
and
for
then they
once
don't
talking
really
about
show
politics.
how it will bring diversity, then I'm going to draw attention to it.
I'm surprised they let you in.
And I'm still unconvinced that Open RAN will bring diversity in the.
So elaborate a bit what you mean by diversity in this
especially when you've got people like diversity, as in. Less sort of worry about supply. So a kind of resilient sort of number of vendors that you can rely on,
right.
And no kind of choke points or bottlenecks there.
Yeah,
that's what I don't think we have with. And I just think the whole premise is completely flawed. I don't see how opening up interfaces between different bits of the RAN brings diversity. It brings more overall players into the mix because you get specialists. It makes it easier for specialists, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get more baseband software developers.
Right.
So you've still got the same size market, and therefore you might just have 2 or 3 baseband software developers. It's just they're different from the guys doing your radio units.
Right.
So is your point, as I understand it, that you're saying as long as there's always going to be some kind of choke point, some kind of pinch in the hourglass where you'll get limited suppliers, then you can have all the diversity you want either side of that hourglass, but you're still going to be constrained by that one bit where there's the least amount of
You want more than
choice.
2 or 3 suppliers, right? That's the point they're making.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you've got so let's boil it down to the traditional model at the moment. Let's say we've got 3 big suppliers in there that aren't Chinese in Ericsson, Nokia, and I'd put Samsung in there now because once we're getting beyond the 2G, 3G days and it can do 4G and 5G. So we don't really have a duopoly anymore anyway. In fact, maybe even NEC and Fujitsu can do that. But so you get all of your RAN equipment from one of them, which is the main components of which are the radio unit and the computing stuff that they tend to call baseband, but it's a bit more than that really. But it's sort of computing and radio. And then we disaggregate those two elements, we split those apart and make it possible to get those from different people because you've got this interface between them.
Yeah.
But then let's say you've still only got 3 people doing the radio unit stuff and 3 people doing the baseband software stuff, the computing stuff. They might be different people. So you've got 6 guys altogether, but you've still got 3 on each side.
Yep.
So you still don't have any more diversity.
So that's not 6 vendors.
It's you've still got 3 vendors for one thing that you need.
Yeah. Has there been any discernible...
this is why I don't understand
Has the
logic,
emergence of Open RAN led to any discernible downwards pricing pressure?
Well, the pricing stuff, I think the pricing stuff is even more. I mean, I didn't go into that here, but that's total guff, I think, the pricing
So I think the answer to your question seems to be no.
I mean, I think that's. I mean, Rakuten make big claims about how their the capex, they say, is with Open RAN is. I mean, in fairness to them, their whole story is not just about Open RAN. It's about cloud. It's about software more broadly. They don't. Rakuten Symphony doesn't just do Open RAN. They do BSS stuff. They do other things.
Right. Yeah.
But their whole pitch is that you can reduce the cost of rolling out a mobile network by 40% with these technologies, and then your operating costs by 30%. I can buy into the operating cost, some of the arguments on that side a bit more.
Yeah.
The idea being that it's not really to do with Open RAN, though, I think. I mean, I think the cost savings with Open RAN would come. Yeah. The idea would be that if you get more competition into the market, that puts price pressure on things.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's the argument, really, I think, for pricing on the CapEx side. On the operating model
that's
side,
a basic precept of competition.
It's more to do with virtualization. So it's this idea that, which isn't strictly Open RAN, but it's kind of Open RAN, but it's a slightly different thing.
Yeah.
It's putting the baseband, the computing side of it, taking this, disaggregating the hardware and the software, which has been very tightly integrated with custom silicon at the moment, and then being able to put that software on general purpose equipment.
Okay.
And then what you can then do is things like pooling your baseband resources, where they normally be hosted at the cell sites these days. You put them into data centers, and you can use that, and you can share those among other IT resources. You share the hardware with other sort of software.
The cloud computing model,
exactly, and you can run it all on the same cloud platforms. You can run your RAN software on the same computing platforms that you have other things
as
on.
Your OSS and your BSS.
And there you get, there I can buy to some extent into the operating savings argument, but there's a huge amount of complications that go with doing that. The main one being that you need a lot of dark fibre in the market to be able to aggregate things in that way, because you've got to have the connections back to your radio sites, obviously.
Right.
And not a lot of markets have that. I mean, the market that Rakuten comes from does.
Yeah.
But you talked to Howard Watson at BT, who I did recently. He said, it doesn't really work in practice a lot of the time because there's not dark fibre in the market. So that's one of the problems with doing it, and you just need to make a lot of sort of front haul investment, to get it all sort of sorted out. It's quite a lot of re-architecting.
Okay.
And then there's just operational challenges with doing it. So
Fair enough.
And the other thing is, you're working with more. If you are going to be working with more vendors in the mix, then you can potentially be driving up costs. I mean, he put it in a really simple way when I met him at Mobile World Congress and talked to him, this idea of having 6 or 7 vendors in the network instead of 2 or 3.
Yeah.
He's like, we don't want to turn up with a van of 6 or 7 different sort of suppliers spares to do sort of swap outs and jobs and things.
Yeah,
and,
fair enough.
And so the cost side of it, I think, is very spurious, the claims that are made there.
Well, it's conceptual.
And the diversity
at the very
stuff,
least.
I'm afraid no one's convinced me yet that, and the other problem I have with it, it often gets talked about as a kind of Lego system, doesn't it? Open RAN, putting together Lego blocks rather than buying, say, a Fisher-Price toy.
Yeah.
The Fisher-Price toy, they turn. I mean, Pierre might know this because he probably
his kids are dealing with that.
You get one of those, and they're quite hard to.
Young kids, to be fair to him.
They're quite robust, and hard to break. But when you bugger it up, you're screwed, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas, I don't actually think the Lego analogy is very good. I think it's more like a Jenga tower, where you knock one block loose and the whole thing comes crashing down.
That's really
you've got all these different things broken up, and you can get them from different players.
Yeah.
But if you've got 2 or 3 in the mix, they're subscale.
Yeah.
You look at people like Parallel Wireless. What happened to them last year? They laid off half their staff, right? You've got people like that in your mix. Something goes wrong with one of them. I mean, I'd be much more worried about one of them going out of business than
you're saying
an
that
Ericsson or a Nokia.
You seem to be basically saying that the chain's as strong as its weakest link.
Well, of course it is. Of course it's as strong as its weakest link.
But then what if the Lego analogy did apply, hypothetically, and Parallel Wireless goes out of business? Can't you just quickly swap in Mavenir or whatever?
Swap in
Samsung or whatever.
Well, yes, in theory, that's the. It depends who that link is, I suppose. The problem at the moment is that the bit that looks most uncompetitive of all is actually the hardware side of it. So, and it's not a Mavenir, it's not a Parallel Wireless like company, but it's still a kind of big choke point, and not good to just have one sort of company doing the components for that. So.
Okay,
which is Intel, obviously, but
well, actually, so on that Intel point, so that's often what you've highlighted, certainly on this pod and plenty of times in your writing, and I certainly have got no great objection to it. If one of the purpose, well, God, I don't want to get into the weeds on this because then we get into sort of VRAN, and we're going to have a pod soon where we're going to get into the weeds on this shit.
Yeah.
But one of the purposes of abstracting as much of this stuff as possible is to be able to run it on general purpose processors, of which there are only a few major players in the market.
Well, there's not even a few major players.
Yeah. Well, there's Intel and AMD on x86, obviously.
Yeah.
And then there's the ARM ecosystem.
But the ARM ecosystem is nowhere in terms of market share.
Okay, fair enough.
In general purpose processors. I mean, I'm not saying that'll last. There's optimism that will grow, and it is going up. But
yeah, but in terms of processors, I mean, my understanding of the difference between x86 ecosystem and ARM ecosystem was that x86 is not very energy efficient, but it's got a greater top speed. x86 is like a sort of sports car, whereas ARM is like a little sort of Japanese hatchback,
right,
which is much more efficient, and thus why you can stick them into phones where they don't need cooling, where they're reliant on batteries and that sort of thing. Whereas x86 is great in a data center where you've got fans and tons of power and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to slightly on the back of that, there was a bit of pushback from a colleague of ours on Twitter, Gabriel Brown, who's the sort of 5G.
I can sum up Gabriel's point.
Yeah, go for it.
So his point is that at least it's additive. You have so Rakuten is another player in the market, yeah. And if you have this choke point of Intel being there, at least it's another option. Intel's another option to the traditional stuff. I think that's basically to sum it up. That's his main point. Is that Ericsson and Nokia, if we assume they don't go out of business.
So he's saying another option is another option, and that's good.
He's saying another option is another option. So if you have Ericsson, Nokia, like say Samsung doing traditional, and then you have someone like Rakuten coming along and other Open RAN players, even if they're kind of constrained in that area where there's Intel. And I don't think I'm misquoting him on this because there's quite a lot.
No, well, I've got the tweets up if you want.
That won't help, Ed, because it's quite rambling, that debate.
Yeah, I know. He's just having a little look over my shoulder and get up to speed on it.
But he's basically saying it's still additive, so you still have another player in the market. So it's still, and I take that point, yes. Yeah. But Open RAN in and of itself isn't creating diversity. You could do that. Neil McRae actually said this. You could do that by other means.
I see.
That Open RAN's not creating diversity if there's a bit in the Open RAN mix. If we have one ecosystem and every player in that ecosystem is dependent on the same component supplier, that's not diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. No. I think those are all good points, and
it's just an accidental thing that's come about because it's. The other thing is, to talk to. I'd said this to Rakuten at the event. What about this concern? Their response was, "Oh yeah, good point." And then Rabbi Debussy, who was the guy answering the question, went, "Yeah, but at least it's not closed." By which he meant that you can take those Intel general purpose processors and put anybody's software on top of it in a way that you can't with custom silicon. Yeah, sure, but then you've still got the choke point. And then he went on to talk about economies of scale for a long time and how general purpose processors are going to overtake custom silicon in the future, and that's a reason to be excited about them. But that's almost arguing against diversity.
Indeed. One bit of a fairly extensive Twitter exchange, which I found amusing. There's a chap called Paul Rhodes, who I know is a regular listener to the podcast. Hello, Paul. And he got involved, and he made one point, he made an analogy. He said, do you define your laptop by the silicon inside or by the OEM badge outside? So in other words, you got a laptop like the one I've got here is a Dell laptop. It's got an Intel vPro little badge on it. I'm not sure how I define it. I'd probably call it a Dell laptop. I wouldn't call it an Intel laptop. So fair enough, Paul, on that one. And anyway, and he goes, personally, I know people with AMD processors, but no idea who AMD or Intel is. It's a Lenovo. So that's further to my point. But then Neil McRae, who's been on the pod and will hopefully be on again soon, goes, Paul, if you're trying to tell me there is diversity in the laptop space, and that's a viable comparison, and the way you've wrote, bad grammar there, Neil.
I think you wrote this in a hurry.
Yeah. Or maybe it was a bad spell check on his phone. Where you've wrote that question, I'd say you've been in the pub since last night, smiley face. So there was a little bit of burnage going on there. I mean, I don't know. It gets so into the weeds, I'm not sure what to make of it. I largely agree with you. And
it doesn't
away
get
from
that much
event,
into the weeds. You can recognise this. This doesn't even have to be about Open RAN. If you want to talk about supply chain diversity, what should they be worried about? It's the exact point that Ed made earlier. Where are all the chips made in the world, all the advanced chips?
Yeah.
Taiwan.
So...
And so this gets me onto my take.
I get all this diversity bullshit. It really gets on my nerves when you've got situations like that. That's what if they really want to sort of do something about technology diversity and us not depending on one choke point in the network.
Can I nick your neck?
Of course you can.
Now that's not an easy problem to solve. To get an advanced foundry up and running that can compete against TSMC is not an easy problem to fix. Which is probably why they've not really done anything.
Incredibly difficult problem to fix. Yeah.
So it's one of those. We can't really fix it. So let's just pretend it's not happening. Let's look at the RAN instead. But where do all those chips come from that go into the RAN?
Yeah.
You were assuming maybe that the sort of maybe small nanometer stuff, 5 nanometer, 7 nanometer, is more about your smartphones.
Yeah.
According to Tommy Wheater, who I spoke with at Mobile World Congress, their latest RAN equipment is using 5 nanometer chips. Cutting edge chips.
Right.
You can only get those at the moment, as far as I'm aware, from maybe Samsung as well as TSMC. But TSMC produces most of them.
Yeah.
So if that's the stuff that's going into networks in the UK, we're dependent on Taiwan.
Oh yeah.
And meanwhile, they're running around worried about the fact that we use Nokia and Ericsson.
Well, so that takes me to my take on this, which was slightly different to yours, and that's not to in any way belittle or downplay yours, because I largely agree. But I sort of focus more on the public sector involvement. So they had a panel. We both used photos that we got off Rakuten of the panel. Where
I only use it because it's got Ray LeMaitre in it.
Well, exactly. It's interesting. So, talking about former colleagues, so Ray, who used to be...
I see you've cut him out.
Telecoms TV guy.
I only cut him out of the photo. I did give him a shout-out in the thing.
Like the Stalin photo?
I called him... Where is it? I said... I said the majority of the opening event was taken up by questions posed to the above panel, where I did cut Ray out, but only because he wasn't one of the people I was quoting, by grizzled veteran telecoms hack Ray LeMaitre. I thought maybe he'd find that amusing.
I called him a local coffee expert.
You called him a local coffee expert. So I mean, hopefully he's got some entertainment from our little rib.
Normally
aside.
I send him things when he's been mentioned, but I didn't this time.
But yeah, he was firing questions at him, and presumably there was a degree of sort of dress rehearsal to all of these things, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But 2 of the 4 people on the panel. So one was a senior politician from Japan, another was a mid-ranking politician from the UK.
Neither of them look very senior.
I think she was, if you look at her job title. Anyway. And then there was a bloke...
Certainly not senior in years.
I don't know, I'd guess late 30s, early 40s. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I think she was senior in stature anyway, in ranking or whatever. And then there was a guy from Etno who's like a trade body that represents European operators, and then there was the guy you mentioned, Rabi Debussy from
Patrick Donegan put it on Twitter, the guy from Etno turned up because none of the operators could be bothered to, because it wasn't important enough.
That is a point. So Etno represents operators, but that's it hadn't occurred to me at the time, but I think that is a point. And he was kind of representing EU operators as well, as opposed to UK, I think, which is increasingly a distinction, obviously, post-Brexit. Anyway, my point was there's a lot of political involvement in Open RAN. Okay, so we've got the Japanese politician, we've got the British politician. and then we got a trade association, and then we got a Rakuten person. We actually didn't have a single person representing operators, as you say, directly. And I think we all know why there's so much political involvement, because this duopoly of Nokia and Ericsson was created by the fact that the US pressured its allies to ban Chinese vendors from their 5G networks.
Yeah.
Initially, we were going to try a fudge where we were just going to ban them from the core, and then Donald Trump got on the phone and went, "Bojo, you fucking a-hole," and Bojo went, "Sorry, old chap, I'll deal with it right now." And then we banned them from the RAN as well, and then BT's got to do this very sort of costly thing, especially BT. I mean, everyone, I think, well, not everyone, most people had a piece of it, but BT were especially exposed, weren't they? Is that right, Ian?
BT was the most heavily dependent on Huawei. Yeah. And then I think we spoke about this last week. A piece Ian wrote where if the same shit happens in Germany, they're a whole order of magnitude more exposed to Huawei than. Well, that's because they spent the last few years carrying on using Huawei and building a lot of equipment.
Yeah. And Germany's got this. Germany's got this really interesting, and I don't lack sympathy for them. They're sort of like, well, we're not just going to do what the fucking Yanks tell us. We are going to be dependent on Russia for natural gas, which obviously hasn't turned up particularly well. No. And we are going to hang out with the Chinese on telecoms, and we are going to do that.
But the point you make about Russian natural gas, I think, is probably one of the reasons this has come up again, actually, in terms of, you talk about supply chain resilience and being too dependent on people. I totally agree with, we always mention him, John Strand's point, that they've probably gone, are we too reliant on Chinese electronics, basically, Could the similar thing happen? Could they cut us off the way
and to
that
take an
things
even
turned
bigger
off the
step back
taps?
geopolitically, maybe Germany's got its tails between its legs a little bit since the Ukraine thing.
Yeah.
Because they were overexposed to Russia. Now they're presumably having to say, America, you got any spare LNG or whatever?
Well, it's Qatar and America, isn't it?
And that might have shifted the whole balance where they're going to be more receptive to American pressure to ban Huawei or whatever. Who knows how these fucking things work?
I think Qatar's doing most of the LNG, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's easy to underestimate, like, to the extent to which the USA is so much more powerful militarily than any other country on earth.
Yeah.
And so, if that does become a thing, like, obviously a number of countries in Central Europe are probably, looking over their shoulders a bit more keenly than they were a few years back on account of, Russian actions in the Ukraine. And, if you're in that situation and you'd like to be on NATO/America's good side, then... I always...
Which leads to all kinds of soft power.
Well, it does, and America's not afraid to use it, because I think, the big geopolitical thing with the US is they're like, we only want to be in conflict with one superpower at the time.
Yeah.
So let's wrap up Russia by doing a
Get that one
proxy
done
war
and
through
dusted.
the Ukrainians, by giving them all of our old gear.
And then face China front on.
Exactly. We've only got to worry about one other superpower at a time. If you ask people, what is the largest air force in the world?
They have assume US.
Yeah, you're going to say the US Air Force.
As many aircraft as the next 10 countries.
What is the second largest air force in the world?
China. No.
US Navy. What is the third largest air force in the world?
You're going to say US Army.
Exactly. And if we separated out the Marine Corps from the US Navy, they'd be the fourth largest in the world.
Jesus
the
Christ.
US spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined.
Damn.
So, if you're a little bit worried about an existential threat and you can get the Americans on your side, then politically, and you can see all of that stuff.
But then you can see how Germany and by extension the whole of the EU, the EU likes to think of itself as a third superpower. If we take US and China as the other superpowers,
yeah, true.
And obviously collectively to some extent that is accurate in terms of its spending power.
It is, yes.
Not in its military spend. That's for fucking sure. But you can see why Germany, which is basically at the helm of the EU as far as I'm concerned, and one of the reasons I was a Brexiteer, because I've got no problem with Germany, but it's not England.
Yeah.
Germany's got Germany's interests, and England or Britain has got Britain's interests.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can see why they would want to strike some kind of middle path between the incredible power, hard and soft power of the US,
of course,
and the importance, especially in an economic basis, of maintaining good relationships with China, especially, but also Russia and other sort of Eastern powers.
It's a massive tangent.
That's true. China will be the world's largest economy by some 2030 something.
Yeah.
And so, if we're thinking about...
So what are you going to do? Just follow the US and ignore them?
Well, if we're thinking in terms of rises and falls of empires over decades or centuries rather than, years, then...
I think China's in big trouble.
Demographically they've got some problems.
That's a massive problem.
Yeah. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is that you look at it from the outside and you don't get a lot of sort of accurate news coming out of China, obviously, because of the kind of place it is. There's probably a lot going on that we don't know about that is not necessarily very good for them, and you get glimpses of that when some BBC journalist manages to get in, and it's not all sort of a super fast growing economy and happy days.
And I totally agree.
You look
at
the way they totally sodded up the pandemic's a good example.
I think that just sounded absolutely nightmarish.
They clearly didn't have a clue what they were doing at the top level there in terms of managing it, and have had to massively backtrack and pretend that it was. What were they saying? The West was irresponsible for just letting people die, and they were still coming out with this bullshit a few weeks ago. When guys were locked into factories, on bunk beds. And,
sorry to drag that because I know we're running out of time. What are we looking at for time, Pierre? By the way, in terms of from now,
we're at the 1 hour and a half.
Yeah. So how much longer before we got?
Well, it's up to you. People say it's too long.
All right. Well, so I'll drag it back. The reason I go on about the geopolitical side within Open RAN is a lot of the push behind Open RAN, back to the immense power of the US that Ed just described. They're really big on it. They see it as a geopolitical solution as much as a technological solution, and I don't know if they're right. And when you've got politicians making decisions about what is quite technical stuff. That you wonder, and then Japan's very involved, and Japan's a big US ally. I just linked to something they're doing that they've started ramping up, denying access to China for certain chip manufacturing equipment from China, Japan as well.
But that emphasises the point even more because that's why they're saying it's about diversity. Yeah. That's why they're saying the main benefit of it is diversity.
Yeah, exactly. But I just focus on the political pressure to say that rather than the business or technological pressure.
I don't have anything against Open RAN per se. Maybe it does some great things. I mean, there's stuff on the RIC side, the Radio Access Network Intelligent Controller stuff, that sounds quite innovative and like it could lead to new types of service. And, I don't have anything against Mavenir wanting to come along and do software rather than Ericsson. If they can do better software and people want to buy it, great. I just think when people stand up there and go, it's about diversity, and then don't back it. I use the word 100 times, and they got two politicians sitting there, and they don't. And I can't. And like you, I'm thinking, why are you here even anyway?
Do you know what I mean?
I don't go to Ericsson dues and have politicians sitting next to them. I don't go to Orange Lab openings and have
sums up my
politicians sitting next to them. So why are you even bloody well here?
And they kept thanking Japan, and all Japan did was chuck a couple of million into the pot.
Yeah, and you use the word diversity about 1 million times and then don't defend it, then cold curmudgeons like me are going to give you a hard time.
Fair enough. Okay, look, in the interest of, I don't know how often you listen to the podcast, Ed, but I'm always trying to keep it a little bit shorter.
Okay.
We've sort of stretched it on, so
I'll talk fast.
All I do is butt in every now and then and sort of truncate the chat. Moderate. So we're final, and there is a natural segue because the final bit of current affairs that we want to talk about came out today, which was Huawei's annual numbers for 2022. It takes them 3 months to process those 2022 numbers.
Some people are pretty slow getting their annual reports out, though. It's not just them.
And do you know what? I mean, there have been loads of times in the past where I've moaned about Huawei not being transparent enough. So if it takes them 3 months to deliver a more comprehensive annual report, then fair play.
Yeah, well, I don't know how comprehensive it is, but...
Well, yes, more comprehensive. It's all relative, isn't it? So the top line is that their profit for the year was about 35.5 billion CNY, what is that? Renminbi?
Yuan.
I always forget what the difference between renminbi and yuan.
Well, it's basically the same, I think.
Yeah. It's like pounds and sterling or something like that. Anyway, so 35.5 billion Chinese shekels, whereas a year ago it was 114 billion.
Oh, this is net profit you're talking about?
This is profit for the year. That was my headline data point. The profit's right down the toilet. Now, it has to be said,
a year ago,
flat. The sales are about flat. They're slightly up, maybe, I don't know, a fraction of a percent.
Up, isn't it?
Yeah, but let's call it flat. You're right. And a year ago, their profits were inflated by the fact that they flogged, among other things, x86 data center business or server business.
They sold a server business and they
sold Honor.
Smartphone business.
They sold
as well,
the Honor smartphone,
yeah.
correct. Yeah. But even when you compare it to 2 years ago, it's about half.
Yeah.
So obviously they're struggling with profitability, and I made a sort of slightly cheeky juxtaposition because they've got she used to use her Chinese name, but now she seems to use her anglicised name, Sabrina Meng or Meng. I heard them pronounce it Meng. I think they pronounce it
Meng Wenzhou.
Yeah, exactly. But now she's Sabrina.
My pronunciation is probably not very good.
No, it sounds pretty good. Better than mine, mate.
That's
not saying much. Sabrina.
From now on, she's Sabrina.
And she
did she have another name?
That's what Ed just said, isn't it?
But there was another anglicised name that she was using in Canada. There's not Sabrina.
I'm
fairly sure.
Well, that's the handy thing about being able to switch names, isn't it?
Are you allowed to change your anglicised?
Actually, Sabrina's the name I use at the weekends.
Is it? I can see you suiting Sabrina, Scott.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, she's the daughter of the founder, Ren...
Zhengfei.
There we go. I'm actually just forgetting their names, not just.
I'm pronouncing it wrong.
It's Ren Pengfei, no?
No, Zhenfei.
Yeah.
Ah.
It's ZHENGFEI.
So she's his daughter, but the big story with her is that she was the one that was under house arrest in Vancouver for years.
Yeah.
Because when the Americans first started having a go at Huawei, they'd set up these sanctions, and they were trying to do her, she's been the CFO of Huawei for a while. They're trying to do her for breaching those sanctions.
Yeah.
But either they didn't find enough evidence on her, or the fact that China happened to arrest a couple of Canadian journalists or business people.
They were politicians, I think, like low-level ambassador types. I think. But
you got the impression that there was some proxy bullshit going on.
Yeah.
And in the end, they went, "Oh, I see. It's like that, is it? All right then." But I think they also struggled to make the legal case against her as well. Anyway, so she's back. She's been back for about 18 months, and now she's become the rotating chair, as they call them. That used to be my joke. When I had a bit more room, I'd swivel around on my chair.
So she's one of the rotating chairs.
Well, now she's the chair.
How many people do they have now?
So she's in the rotation, and now it's her turn. So she's the chair.
How many other ones?
3, I think. I think
so
3 are in the rotation. Yeah, that was about. I wrote it up about a year ago.
She replaced someone a year ago.
Yeah,
I totally missed that.
Yeah, I wrote it up.
I just thought she came back to China and took up her CFO post.
So my headline from 5th of April 22 was, this is when I was still, and I always get confused, and this isn't me trying to be a dick, but I never know which name to do first. So in that case, I wrote Meng Wanzhou. But then sometimes it's the other way around. I just don't understand how it fucking works.
Well,
anyway,
don't worry about it too much. Sabrina, what's she up to?
Sabrina, yeah.
What was she up to last April?
Well, so she... she got added to the quote rotating chair roster in place of someone called Guo Ping.
Oh yeah,
who then went off.
The more interesting ones.
He went off to be the chairman of the supervisory board.
Is that like Ericsson's advisors? When you become an Ericsson advisor, you know that your days are numbered.
Yeah. You get promoted upwards out of the job.
You're only there for about 6 more months.
We don't hear much from Guo Ping anymore. But anyway, I found it quite. I just enjoyed the juxtaposition. So the other point.
So what did she do to earn that position then, Scott?
Apart from, I'm sure she's very competent. I'm not saying it's all just nepotism. But yeah, the fact that she's the daughter of the founder, I presume, hasn't done her any harm. But I'm sure she's very good at what she does. The thing I just found interesting. So obviously Huawei for years has had to play the sort of defiant. The US is trying to fuck us over, and we're going to keep on keeping on. It's been their angle, which I've got some sympathy with, given that the US has yet to deliver any kind of smoking gun on the stuff they accuse Huawei of. It's not to say I don't think they did it. I think it's plausible. I just haven't seen the fucking evidence.
Did what?
That's all. Well, that their kit represents a national security threat, because basically everything that goes over Huawei kit then gets funneled back to the CCP for them to use for their moustache-twirling, nefarious purposes.
I always struggle to believe that a network operator is not going to know what is going in and out of their network on the most granular basis possible.
You'd think, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and so I was just always... I just think flip it around the other way. Ericsson's active. Ericsson and Nokia are active in China and work with Chinese operators. If China...
they're not very active in China
fair
anymore.
enough. Maybe it's died down over the last few years. But it just seems like, I do believe in liberal capitalism. It just seems.
He's a libertarian.
Well, there we go.
No, not a hardcore libertarian. I do like roads and hospitals and things like that.
We should set up a Spurs libertarian little niche.
That's the most niche membership group possible.
But no, I completely get your point. And what I don't like about it, in the absence of evidence, is the broader inference that everything Chinese is inherently dodgy. So there's a xenophobic aspect to it, but that's fine. But then there's a selective aspect to it, because we embrace other areas of Chinese technology without the same aggro.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's I'm not sure it goes as far as saying it's xenophobic.
Well, no, I don't think it is when we
I think it's the concern about it coming from a totalitarian state, where it's like saying we don't want to use Russian gas. It's not because you don't like the guys who work for the Russian gas company because they're Russian. It's because there's a guy called Vladimir Putin.
But then we'll still do business with Saudi Arabia or whatever.
Yeah, but that's a different argument. That doesn't justify. That doesn't mean it's wrong not to do it.
It's the central.
It's like Neil's point about laptops to Paul, isn't it? Yeah, okay, maybe there's a similar shitty situation in laptops. So it doesn't.
Well, the central role that 5G networks are expected to play, and also the fact that if you're a company in China, you are subject to government interference, which you don't have a choice about that. They didn't like Jack Ma's speech, the founder of Alibaba,
and then he disappeared.
He just disappears for God knows. Government can do that to you.
There's a much bigger argument in the world of globalization about what countries you want to deal with, and that's something that's never really been dealt with.
That's a fair point.
The only thing I would say,
do we want to deal with Saudi Arabia? Do we want to deal with some of these countries? And what are the implications of doing that? And the gas situation with Russia has been the classic example of that. We never really had this before the end of the Second World, before the end of the Cold War. We never really had this. This has all become quite a recent thing, and I think technology's exacerbated it basically. So
I don't think the Western attitude towards China is driven primarily by the fact that they are less democratic than us. I think they're driven by the fact that the US, and principally Donald Trump, this really kicked off like around 2016 time, have identified them, have brought them more into focus as a geopolitical competitor than ever before.
Yeah.
And that's why we cherry pick which states which we could moralise about we choose to condemn more than others. But that's a whole fucking rabbit hole that we haven't got time to get into now. But I just think the interesting point is that Huawei's there. It could be that every little bit of Huawei kit in the world is being tapped into by a CCP and Xi Jinping himself is listening in going, ha-ha. But I doubt it. But even if that's true, we haven't seen the evidence. And so Huawei, just viewing Huawei in isolation, forgetting they're Chinese, forgetting who they are, they're a company that is taking an exceptional hit to their business for political reasons. And they're posturing, I find their positioning quite dignified. They're like, okay, we're getting a lot of incoming shit. We're going to keep on keeping on. We're going to try and diversify into areas where the Yanks currently aren't hassling us.
Yeah.
And I think fair play to them. And I say that without any bias in their favour. I'm certainly not being paid to promote them. And I just think, looking at Huawei in isolation, if I was there, how would I deal with the situation I found myself in? I think they're dealing with it reasonably well. I mean, how much help they're getting from the Chinese state I don't think they need much help from the Chinese state. They have one of the world's biggest telecoms market on their doorstep, practically as a captive customer. So they've got about 2/3 of the.
They don't now. They certainly had it in the past.
True, but
they've still got a majority.
And another argument for banning them or restricting them is that they never played by WTO rules. They've been found. The whole court cases with Cisco years ago.
Yeah.
I know they were settled on grounds that didn't sort of carry huge consequences for either party, I don't think, but I think it's pretty
definitely some piss taking in the past.
They were dumping products, and we talk about like diversification and what happened to to a lot of the companies that disappeared actually and got swallowed up by Ericsson and Nokia and people like Nortel disappearing. A lot of that was, I think, Huawei coming in and pricing it below cost and doing it with Chinese government financing behind them. So, if you get these, to me, were much stronger arguments, I thought.
And I think they are stronger
for banning them. Plus, what have they done to Ericsson and Nokia? They never had more than 10% anyway. They've been squeezed out. They come along and say, well, you're not going to let us be in Sweden, then we're going to basically fuck you up in China and not allow you to have any business at all. So
going back to the point that Huawei are soldiering on. They're soldiering on because they got a massive domestic market on their doorstep.
Yeah,
and
totally.
and there are still many parts of the world, particularly around Southeast Asia, Southern Asia, Africa, where they're perfectly happy to take Chinese government cheap finance and Huawei gear, which, as I know from a long,
they probably get a lot of land in the process as well, or something.
Huawei gear used to regularly come in at dozens of percentage points below the price of Nokia and Ericsson,
and it was as good,
and allied with the financing deals as well.
Yeah.
It's a knockout. It's a knockout deal, and we can argue around the parameters and whether it's fair or not. Yeah. But look, I'm a pretty much I'm a red-blooded capitalist, and I'm just you let the market and good old competition.
That doesn't sound like red-blooded capitalism to me.
That's Ian's point.
If you've got them coming along with Chinese government financing, selling it at a fraction of the cost of anybody else,
shouldn't the capitalist process then mean that we should be coming up with cheap sources of finance instead of throwing up toys out the pram and going, that's unfair?
But the situation that existed in Europe a few years ago in the 4G days, whether they were the dominant provider, and they've gone to that position very, very quickly with Chinese government financing, pricing well below the cost of the two companies, one of which nearly went out of business, had to sort of restructure under the current CEO, was in really deep peril.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. This is where I think regulation needs to be involved. Adam Smith and everything. Play by the rules. Otherwise, fuck off.
And I've cited this lots of times in the pod. I'm with you, Ed. I'm a free marketeer, but unfortunately, for the free market to work, it can't be completely laissez-faire. It does require quite a lot of intervention.
And they don't, because China doesn't play by the rules.
One is to prevent
politics are a thing. So of course.
Well, one is to prevent monopolistic cartel behaviour.
True.
But another is, and this is where I will agree with Ian's point. If we think that the Huawei got to where it is today, and I think we can all concede, I mean, one of the big things they banged on about in their thing today was how much they spend on R&D. So they're obviously doing a lot of R&D independent of the West. It's not all just fucking reverse engineering and industrial espionage. Yeah. They're obviously inventing a lot of stuff themselves. But let's say they got a leg up a decade ago by the state, then I think it's right for the WTO or whatever, for global regulatory bodies to intervene and go, no, you're taking the piss. Okay. Because in the US or in Europe, we're playing by the rules, and you're getting unfair help from the state.
Reported years ago on instances of them spying on other companies, like being there after trade shows had finished. At a very, very low level.
Dude,
the Wall Street Journal picked up on that story.
That, and all I'd say is that I sincerely hope that our leading companies in the West are spying on their Asian counterparts as well.
Well, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It probably happens.
That's all part of the game. And going back to the Industrial Revolution and on, developing countries, industries and regions have plagiarised and stolen technology from the spinning Jenny to 5G baseband equipment and on and on and on and on. And I'm not arguing for a totally laissez-faire approach to it. Obviously, politics is a thing, and we might not want to become over-reliant and monopolistic and etc., etc., etc. But it just doesn't sit comfortably with me to just say.
It feels like there's some double standards. I mean, that was my point about why do we hassle China and not Saudi Arabia or whatever. And I'm not saying we should hassle Saudi Arabia. I don't know if they're guilty of anything.
But that's like when the Iraq invasion happened, and I remember talking about it with friends, and they were like saying, well, and by the way, I'm not declaring my position on it, but they were like, oh, but we don't go and intervene in other countries in the world on human rights records if that's the justification for it. It's selective. But that doesn't mean it's wrong to do it. That's totally. That's not. I
don't think those two things are mutually exclusive at all. I think pointing out double standards is not the same as having a moral, an absolute moral argument.
Yeah, and it's like the Qatar-Russia example. We're getting a lot of LNG from Qatar at the moment, or Europe is, which is a fucking awful country. Let's be honest with you, it's a shithole.
Good enough to have a World Cup.
Yeah, well, it should never have happened there. Everybody who's sensible agrees it's a shithole, and it's not
Pierre
somewhere
disagreed
that you should,
up until the final,
and that it's not someone you should ever do business with in a kind of world where you're going to have the absolute morals, but it's probably not somewhere to worry about in the same way that Russia is. So it's kind of realpolitik, isn't it? Well, whatever you call it.
These are big topics, and I think if it's all right with
enough beers to get
and I think it's all right with you two, and we're probably already going beyond my way beyond my hour and a half target that I set myself. So I think if it's all right, we'll wrap it. I think we're going to take it to the pub after. So
sure.
So we'll do that. So, but you'll just have to
carry on filming at the pub.
Listeners, if you've made it this far, you'll just have to imagine how the pub chat went. Maybe we'll have a sort of. They used to do that with TV programs. They'd have the afters.
But we did that once with Ed. Actually, we were kicked out of a pub and had to move.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Did we?
Do you remember? Yeah, we did it in up in King's Cross.
Oh,
it was after an Omdia event.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course.
I was
No,
on
we're
back
in
then.
King's Place.
Yeah, so you have been on it a few times.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about that.
All right. Well, anyway, but I'll stick by my guns and I'll end it there. So thanks a lot, Ed. It's great to see you again.
You're welcome.
And thanks a lot for listening. I think we're going to skip next week, is it?
Oh yeah, and then I'll be online next Wednesday.
Oh, is it next week we're doing it remotely and then we're skipping the week after?
Yeah.
That's how we're doing it. So, yeah,
Easter
we're doing
break.
it remotely because Easter break and people have got lives to live. But thanks a lot for joining us for this one and make sure you join us for that one.